Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. The Epstein class is a thing now. It's becoming a term which I think now defines a whole host of issues and individuals and companies and political systems and, of course, media institutions, academic. There's an entire Pandora's box that has been opened by Jeffrey Epstein inadvertently. And I think it's not going to go away. We've already done one particular show with my two guests who are with me again in the studio today. Tony Gosling, who's investigative journalist, former BBC journalist as well. And also online, we have Ryan Dawson, who's a geopolitical analyst, an author in his own right. And both of them have given us a real understanding, a deeper understanding of what was actually going on with the present situation with Jeffrey Epstein. But today I want to focus on the impact of this kind of predator class, these people who seem to have an interest in exploitation of children, of exploitation of resources, who seem to be in power at a level which is almost unimaginable to the ordinary person. And they seem to have networks which communicate with each other and work together for particular ends. One of those ends, quite clearly now, seems to me to be a transhumanist, techno-feudalist future. Tony, welcome to the show. And welcome also, Ryan. Thank you for joining me again. So let's begin, Tony, today with you on this set of people that seem to constantly come into the news now, but they were hidden for a very long time. And I'm going to begin with one little cabal, particularly the South African fraternity, like Elon Musk and Mr. Thiel and others. There seems to be this kind of little crowd which has a very dystopian view of the future, are in control of technology, ranging from Palantir through to X, and space programs and brain chipping facilities. And they have philosophers within their World Economic Forum and other obvious institutions, tangible institutions, like Yuval Harari, who advocates hacking humans. So this is no longer, pie in the sky. It's not like theorizing. There are facts on there. Tell me, what do you think they're up to, and what sort of future do they want us to have? And given that they're also very close to the paedophilic and other circles of Epstein, how does that all relate?
Well, look, Yuval Harari, his idea about hacking humans, the way he presents it is quite clever, really. He's saying, well, this is inevitable. Well, of course, it isn't inevitable. People and governments can legislate to stop such activity just as they can stop anything else if they wish to, and they can look at technologies such as AI, and they can identify threats to their citizens and to mankind, and they can stop those threats if they wish. So this concept that this is all inevitable really is just a big lie. But this is a part of a much wider philosophy that he's rolling out, I think. And you mentioned South Africa. During World War II, of course, there were quite a lot of people in the Western world who were sympathetic to the Nazis, not least of which in Germany. In Britain, there was, of course, in the United States and Canada. And it's Elon Musk's grandfather was involved in this there was a sort of dream world back in the 1930s of eugenics, which was becoming very acceptable around the Western world. People like Bertrand Russell embracing it.
Aldous Huxley as well.
Yes, of course, many people who, after the Second World War, when they saw what the Nazis were talking about, the master race, we must breed the master race. If you are not of the correct blood, etc. This was, everyone realized, well, actually, this whole thing about genes, let's just forget it, because most people are just who they are. Some are good and some are bad, and it's not dependent on your genes. This is nonsense. And in fact, it's part of this idea of breeding people as if they were plants or animals, which is a very barbaric, retrogressive way of looking at humanity. But there were people who were embracing all of that. And during World War II, many of them were chased out. Some were collaborating with the Nazis. As we know, our very own king, Edward VIII, was a Nazi. He was very pro-Nazi, and so he had to be shuffled out. I remember hearing that he actually, this is from a former MI6 officer, that he actually tried, and this is why he was sent over to, I think it was the Bahamas or Bermuda. He and his wife tried to get into Germany across the lines at the beginning of the Second World War. So there were lots and lots of sympathisers. So the one place in the British Empire that people who were British or part of the empire could go was South Africa. It was out of the war. Canada was in the war. So there was a nest of these individuals that formed from Technocracy Inc., which was the Canadian Musk's grandfather's little outfit, coalesced around them in South Africa. So they're watching from afar.
I see.
A bit like the Swiss were watching the war raging around them. These people were down there, and I think they were thinking about, well, what should we do after the war when we've got a lot of the loot from Europe that the Nazis had taken? What shall we do with it? And they were planning with the Nazis, actually, I think, towards the end of the war, planning what to do to create a kind of Fourth Reich.
Well, Ryan, come in on this, please, because we're going to focus on solutions. Tell me, I mean, Tony's given us his view that there was this kind of nurturing of this eugenics fraternity based on like a lot of Nazi ideology. How did it manifest in the US? What's the connection?
Well, the Nazi philosophy, too, comes from this sort of, eugenicist, social Darwinistic way of thinking. And a lot of extremely wealthy people get a God complex. They get it in their head because, like, well, because I'm rich, I must be superior. I must be better than the plebs and the hoi polloi. I'm just smarter and better. And, we should make these decisions. And when they get to the point where you can actually edit genes and do designer babies and things, they think that, well, we can play God with society and shape it, if we just get the right genetics. But the flaw in this social Darwinistic approach is, your genes set up your hardware, but not your software. It'll determine how tall you are, what color your eyes are, things like that. But to attribute or ascribe complex thoughts such as your political alignment, your religious beliefs, the way you behave on genes is silly. I mean, you can change somebody's religion or philosophy or political alignment with one conversation. That's all software. The language you speak, all that is software. You can teach any baby any language. And it's not something intrinsic to your DNA. But these kind of like deterministic people, they live in a realm where they think everything is deducible to your genetics, IQ, everything, the way you vote, whatever. It's all just based on your genes. It isn't. But this is what they like to play with. And what can destroy that is the same thing that darkness always runs from, light. They can only get away with what they've really fallen apart already. When you see these internal conversations and they're calling people goyim and saying how, well, I'm 98% Jew, you're only this, and we have a higher soul than these other people. Like, our souls are superior and made of different stuff, as Fisher would say. Like, this is crazy talk. And if they say that in front of people, people realize how crazy they are. It's a natural byproduct of Zionism for people to feel some sort of chosen superiority, that they're better than other people. That's intrinsic to that interpretation of the faith, that a deity granted them land and God's a real estate agent and we could just murder everybody and steal their stuff. If I didn't do it, somebody else would, a kind of attitude. So it shouldn't shock people. But what destroys these ideas is when they say them out loud, because the majority of the rest of the planet are not into eugenics, are not into this, if you over specialize, you breed weakness type of thing. They don't understand. They don't understand how anyone could operate like this. But the Bill Gateses and things, they get into their head. This is a guy who's so maniacal that he wanted to blot out the sun to fight global warming, which sounds like something a supervillain would do from a comic book. Like, we're going to blot out the sun.
Yeah.
Sounds like the Warner Brothers idea or something. You listen to Epstein and Bannon, they're not intelligent. They're sitting there talking to each other, flexing on high school knowledge. Most of it wrong. I mean, Epstein said Plato and Aristotle didn't write anything down. It's just not true. Yeah. He wasn't some expert banker. These people are not 160 IQ or anything like they think in their heads. Like, a lot of people have wealth because of opportunity and a whole bunch of other variables. It's not because they're superior genetically or anything, but they want to think that. And it gets really crazy. I mean, they were trying to seed, Elon Musk has what, 13, 14 baby mamas. He's talking about colonizing Mars. It's LARPing. And any other like real scientist will just laugh at that. I know you're not going to nuke the ice caps and create it's just science fiction, what you're saying. But it works on a lot of people. They think he's just the smartest man ever. And you listen to him, they're like, the bubble kind of pops. You're like, wow, these are the people in charge. Look at the Trump administration, Pete Hegseth, Mike Huckabee, who doesn't believe in evolution. Like, these are our statesmen. This is who goes and negotiates. Like we're in a world of hurt. I mean, we have some, but they're not even midwits, and they're in charge of these things. So, they can act superior if they want, but what's going to destroy them is breaking the monopoly on media. Like, at the moment we're allowed to talk, they will lose, because they've only been able to get away with their lies because no counter argument can be presented. I mean, we were so far in our own end zone a few years ago that you had to sit and argue about pregnant men. Okay, that's not a real thing, and adults should not even have to like argue about stuff that were stupid, but that's where we were. So you got to remember how bad things were when people wearing 2 masks locked inside their car, afraid to go outside. Like, peak crazy was around 2021. We slowly started to improve, but what's happening is, like, you lifted up the board and all the roaches are coming out, and everyone's freaked out because a lot of people are seeing this for the first time. We're like, yeah, but that's a lot better than when you didn't know about it and it was hidden, because it was still going on whether you stuck your head in the sand or not.
Well,
breaking beneath, but what everybody can do, very easy, because you don't have to be a reporter or influencer. Step 1, boycott every single company involved with people on this Epstein list. Don't ever buy from Bed Bath Beyond, LL Brands, Victoria's Secret, none of that. Don't ever give these people money if you don't have to.
Well, let me just pick up on what you said, because let's just look at the 21st century. 9/11, the people who profited from that would have been the Thiels of the world, would have been the Musks of the world. They all made money from weapons, procurement, whatever. They were all involved in the businesses that would have benefited even from the wars of terror, as I call them, across West Asia. There would have been then, of course, the great prime mortgage scam, where they collapsed people's mortgages, etc., and then bankrupted the entire system, and then got the public basically to pay for all the losses. And then let me run through it. The third one perhaps would be the COVID scenario. So you created this entire experiment based on a virus, apparently, and you've then tested something that was obviously linked to a future that they want to create, in my opinion. Then soon after that, you've got, I guess, the war on terror I've mentioned within there. After COVID, I guess this Epstein file business is a major next in terms of like really hitting the public and shaking them up. So there have been several things.
Total erosion of privacy from AI too. I mean, you've got people making porn from middle school yearbooks and things. Like, it's getting real dark real fast. And yeah, COVID was definitely a step that they went nuts on that. September 11th led to a war in Afghanistan and a war in Iraq, neither of which had anything to do with September 11th. They lied and said that Saddam Hussein had mobile weapons labs making anthrax, and that he was connected to Al-Qaeda, who sent anthrax after 9/11. It wasn't true. And we ended up in a war anyway. But there is kind of George Bush Sr. said we kicked Vietnam syndrome. Well, his son created Iraq syndrome. Nobody wants a war with Iran because of the war in Iraq. The reason they had to use proxies in Syria is because Iraq went so badly that they're not going to stomach boots on the ground. A lot of this does depend on the public will. They cannot have a protracted war with Iran because domestically Americans aren't going to put up with it. And that's the only people that can stop America are Americans. It's not outside pressure. They don't care. I mean, Trump's talking about taking Greenland. I mean, it's insane. But if we don't break the media, we will lose. This is why they bought TikTok. This is why they did the advertiser boycott on X. They know how vulnerable they are. Look at how many people finally saw the disgusting slaughter in Gaza. And it's not like that just started after October 7th. You had cast-led, you had the March for Peace where they just shoot people in the groin and knees whenever they wanted. You had Pillar of Defense, on and on, where they would go and mow the lawn and blow up people in their homes and attack. Blowing up hospitals, that's not new. This has been going on.
Well, I'm glad you raised...
People saw it for the first time because of Telegram, X, and TikTok.
Tony, I'm going to come to you on this, Tony. They do have the capability of beginning to hack human brains. So Harari isn't boasting for nothing. There is neurological advancement, neurotechnology, and neuro rights is a whole thing. Genetic engineering is advancing so rapidly. AI is going, in a direction which is going to be absolutely, completely a game changer, really, for civilization. Ryan says media is the key to tackling them. What do you think, Tony? What do you think we need to do? The people who aren't part of the club. I think George Carlin said, there's a club and you ain't in it.
Yeah, well, I think it's perfectly normal and reasonable nowadays to totally disconnect from the media as well. I mean, there's the job of some of us is to carry on doing the analysis, but for many people, they've just said, well, I just don't believe this anymore, or else I'm finding it toxic and, to my family. So I switching it off and disconnecting too. But ultimately, the reason the media is in a way like the oil industry, a key industry, or the banking industry, is because it's the nervous system of humanity. And in order to coordinate in any way to resist anything in the body, you need the nervous system to be working somehow, So when the nervous system it's almost like, I think of people like Rupert Murdoch and some of these big, the Musks, etc., Eric Schmidts, as like sort of sarin gas getting into the nervous system. Somehow it's all being poisoned. And what they're doing, of course, I mean, when I do my weekly program, I always start off with, thank you for turning off the psycho in the corner. Because it does feel like the psychopaths, the sociopaths are there. I mean, you were talking about the 9/11, for example, and Ukraine war. This arrived after COVID. A massive psyop, effectively, a total proxy war. The idea is, sorry, we don't have any money for healthcare because it's all going to kill Ukrainians. And actually, they're the people who have been dying because of Britain's support for Ukraine in the war with Russia. So and when it comes to actually doing something about the media, we did have a period for probably 15 years or so after the creation of the internet in the mid-1990s, where people were doing really good stuff, news groups, bulletin boards, etc. It was a fantastic period of free information. But what happened, of course, is the Central Intelligence Agency and big banking funders came along and they created these social media companies like Facebook. So they mimicked what we were doing with the early internet in these private platforms where they can cancel, use algorithms. So this is one thing I would suggest is don't use any social media with an algorithm, that use algorithms. Algorithms are used to kill the truth. And you were talking about connecting up to your brain, whether this is actually going to happen or not. I think they would love it to happen, but it has a spiritual dimension, doesn't it? Because if you are connecting up to anything with your brain, whatever it is also connecting into you, into your brain. So obviously there needs to be proper protection for people. This is a spiritual intrusion on our fundamental right to be who we are. So I think we need to start looking at it, as they do, by the way, in spiritual terms. Occultism has for many years dreamed of, and I think they use this to sell this technology sometimes, of living forever. Well, if we alter the genes, we can take out the aging gene and you can live forever. Imagine how much you would pay to have your children have that gene editing tool. So there's an enormous amount of potential, but I think this is sort of the thing that's been going on for centuries in the occult. For example, individuals like John Dee, who was involved with the design for the British Empire back in Elizabethan times. These ideas, like, for example, the golem, is an occult idea, but this is exactly what they're looking at now with AI, creating something that can speak for itself, think for itself. And so the dark side of spirituality, is what I'm trying to say, has been working on this for centuries.
Well, Ryan, there is this kind of, I don't know what, you can't call it Satanist, but there is this kind of tendency towards a cult, which it has a religious-like feel to it. And again, with the Epstein class, they do mix a lot. I mean, they talk about that choseniteness, and the Zionist sense of superiority is definitely there. But there's another darker side. They've got they're sort of the pagan, or sort of pre-Abrahamic, if you like, cults as well. They seem to draw on that, and there's blood sacrifices, talk of blood sacrifices and rituals. What do you make of all of that? Is this part of their culture?
Well, the Abrahamic has blood sacrifices. That's the whole book of Leviticus, is slaughtering sheep and fowl and things. Like, they had that anyway.
Yeah, but not
I
people.
don't see it tied to like religious occultism. I just see this as a bunch of arrogant pricks that worship themselves and think of themselves as genetically superior. And whether they want to add some religious rhetoric to that is on them. Maybe like, yeah, God chose me or something. They can, but it's not necessary. You don't have to believe in the supernatural. You don't have to add that to it to be a dick. Like, these people are like that. They're elitist in their own minds. And, the way gene editing and AI and all that, you can say all the good things we could do, but that's not what's going to end up happening. And you can see we had a brief, like, breath of air in the media in the 90s when the monopoly was broken. But it wasn't enough, because we still ended up at war in Iraq and all these other things. There was nowhere to go to tell the truth. But now with Substack and Telegram, they don't have all of TikTok, because Asia TikTok is not owned by the U.S. Semblance of free speech on Twitter. That's like the best of the worst. But you got to quit using Meta and even YouTube, and you're never going to get anywhere using their tools, because the moment you ascend, they'll just shut you off. And you have to support real alternative media, or you're not going to get anywhere. But the tendency to just tap out, and you see this a lot in like North Korea and China, they just they didn't even look at the news, because like, it's just crap. And you have people who just quit. And there's a lot of young men that are just tapping out. But I think a solution to all, I don't think we would have been arguing about can men get pregnant or any of this nonsense if we still had masculinity, and we don't. Like, that's what's severely lacking, that sense of honor. And I mean real masculine, not like machismo. It's dead. And you can see the social engineering. You see it in school, you see it in sitcoms, cartoons, programs. There is a theme to get you to behave a certain way. And you look at all the open borders and the war with Ukraine, it's all anything positive to human trafficking, they support. Now, why would a bunch of child rapists support human trafficking? But they've been exposed. We know their names. We have a big chunk of the network. So what are we going to do about it? You got to rally behind the leadership, whatever we got, with Thomas Massey and Khan and Rokhan and these people that are trying to do something about Epstein. Epstein is their weak point. They did not want to release these. They released fake files. They had this redacted mess, Bindergate. They don't want you to know about this. It has to keep pressing. They say, you know what? Release everything on JFK too. If you keep finding out all these crimes by the Israeli state, maybe the grip that AIPAC has on Congress will loosen. Maybe the public won't stomach it anymore. But I really don't see realistically a way of winning this other than they pull the trigger too early and Iran physically destroys Israel. I think that's the quickest way out of this.
Well, that's a fascinating take. Tony, Ryan has a good habit of coming back to this kind of Epstein network, and I want to keep it linked to that. Otherwise, we can go off in all sorts of tangents. But people like Peter Thiel, they're implicated, and our government here in Britain is handing over the NHS to the likes of Palantir and Thiel and whatever. And these guys have clearly openly talked about transhumanist tendencies they have. And they seem like psychopaths to me when you actually hear them head on, and even their CEOs and the people around them. What's your take? Let's take Thiel as an example and the threat that he poses to our ordinary public. Because if he's in charge of our health, if they're playing around with our health, then they've got our lives at the press of a finger, haven't they?
Yeah, well, then it's not just the health service that Palantir is coming into. It's a very important company to talk about, which Thiel funded. It's run by Alex Karp. All these people do collect regularly, and they'll be doing so again, I'm sure, this year at the Bilderberg conferences. They're all very keen Bilderbergers. But Peter Thiel, he's taken a very great interest in talking about the Book of Revelation, it seems. But my thoughts about him and his Palantir, this is something which is a motif that comes from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And back in 1978, I think it was, I lent Nick Land a copy of, I think it was The Two Towers. It came back with lots of coffee stains on it or whatever. But Nick, as an influential character now, he's just moved, I think, from Shanghai to San Francisco, just after coming out as at least he's hinting that he's more interested in Satanism than other things, talking about it as sort of punk movement versus ABBA, I guess, back in the 1970s. But so that idea of Nick's is this transhumanist concept is he's taken this idea from the Lord of the Rings, which is actually, I think, a very powerful book written just after the Second World War, which talks about the Illuminati in the eye at the top of the pyramid, the eye on the shields of the Dark Lord Sauron. And then he also, interestingly, in that book, he uses the symbol of the white hand, which all the Freemasons wear, for Saruman. So he's putting all this code into this book for us to understand what is really going on. So you've got these dark forces, spiritual dark forces. You've got the people on down here on Earth who are doing their dirty work, and so I think he's taken this idea, which is actually quite worrying for someone who is into the dark side, to have all this revealed by Tolkien, and he's taking that idea and he's co-opting it to their own dark purposes. That's why they've used this. In fact, there are several companies which have taken motifs from the Lord of the Rings. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but maybe Ryan will remember some. But where does this actually come from? I think Tolkien, when he was writing this book, was really using Wagner's Ring Cycle, and of course Wagner, as a sort of a backdrop against which you should see that book. And of course Wagner's circle, hey, they included the people who would become the Zionists in the late 1800s, and of course the Nazis. If you look at some of the people that were in Wagner's circle as well. So this is also linked to Theosophy. So there are links that you can see where all these ideas come from. But getting back to Thiel, that's why I think he's talking about Revelation, is I think good, intelligent discussion about books like this, things like The Mark of the Beast, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, what to watch out for. These sorts of things from prophecy seem to be unfolding before our eyes. These contactless cards. All you need to do is get one of those chips, put it inside you. There you have the Mark of the Beast. It's getting very close technologically. And so there seems to be, I think one of the best writers on a lot of this stuff is this Canadian, David Livingstone. He's written a book called Transhumanism, The History of a Dangerous Idea. And he traces a lot of this technology, the idea of using technology to control humanity, right back, again, right back. And Ryan's right. You don't need to be into all this occultism to see it's wrong at all. And you don't need to understand it. It's just wrong.
So what's the answer other than taking charge of media or getting rid of the media, which is pushing this kind of common narrative of a dystopian eugenicist, Malthusian, transhumanist future. What do you think that ordinary people, what else can we do to take back control?
Like I said, it's two-pronged. Media is one. You be moral with your wallet. You have to boycott all these industries that are involved in this mess. Being a good parent is one of the best things you can do. And disconnect from garbage, that whole feed your head. Don't plug in, don't listen to their rhetoric about going to war with Russia and the talking heads. Don't watch CNN, Fox, MSNBC. Don't take their poison. Don't buy their products.
It is poison.
Don't absorb their filth. Disconnect yourself and your children from that and educate your kids. Talk to them, unplug them. And you have to develop a next generation that actually has a moral compass and an idea of honor. What we have right now is just attention-seeking, dysfunctional, depraved people that are out there seeking external validation, and it all starts at home. I think people got really done over in mass education, but like right now you have the tools. There are a lot of alternatives, ways of learning. I think it's kind of outdated. You all go sit in a room and learn from the teacher. Like you can get the best information right at your fingertips. It's all there, but people aren't utilizing the tools that are right in front of them. You can learn just about anything off the internet if you wish. You can develop skills, you can develop trade. You have to unplug from the garbage, not give money to these companies, and support alternative media. And you have to have a strong moral compass to say, like, even things I enjoy, I will quit buying if I know the ownership class involved in that is going to use it to blow up brown people overseas. Well, I don't want to have a war with Iran so that people without health care in America can pay for it.
Well, Iran is an important issue to raise because on the one hand, of course, we know it's a resource war. We know there's a bigger war around it in terms of maritime control, the struggle against China that the US sees as a threat to its kind of imperialist hegemony. But there's another war that does strike me as important. Of course, there is and Tony keeps coming back to this, there is at the heart of spirituality, whether you go to Taoism or whether you go to Buddhism or Islam or Christianity, the fact of the matter is there is a pretty clear code of virtue ethics. And you just touched on, that idea of re-establishing our values, our virtues and ethics. And I remember in our conversation before the program, we talked about the samurai code, for instance. So this is a theme that is common within human civilization, which people could go to grab as an alternative, because this is missing from Elon Musk. You can discernibly see it's missing from Thiel. It's missing from this entire cabal which gathered around Epstein. They seem to have something quite the reverse of that virtue ethics. It's all about ego, narcissism. It's about self-aggrandizement. It's about being drunk on power. It's about taking what you want.
People into commodities. Like, why is there such a large prostitution culture in the first place? OnlyFans and all of this that's come about very fast. Young girls are looking at it like, what? Why would they spend all these years, go to college, all that, put all this time in and make less than the girl showing her nipples in her bedroom? The shortcut is so tempting because sex sells. But, there has to be two in that game. There has to be Johns. There has to be customers in that too. Why are people so addicted to pornography and prostitution? What is in them that they feel so broken and they're out there chasing status to see how much punani they can gather? Like, it is an obsession with a lot of young men, and girls are doing it too, where you've got grown adults that can't name 5 countries, but probably have more money than all 3 of us together, because they have an asset that's very valuable in the market. They're selling their bodies. And if you want depravity, is selling your soul. You're just giving away a gift. And whether it's secular philosophy or religion or theology, whatever, it doesn't matter which one, but you have to adopt something to combat this total degeneracy. But it's gotten to a point where there is a financial incentive to add to the filth. You can make a career gesture maxing. You go out and be a clown and commit crimes on film for something like Kick, which is run by gambling, and you can get a lot of money. And like if I were to report absolute nonsense about sulfuric acid and eating babies, it would go viral. And I could make more money and clout and views if I went full Alex Jones and pushed sensationalism. But it isn't true. And that's the problem. We don't have the financial incentive and structure where truth is rewarded. Truth is punished right now. And just lying your butt off makes money.
Well,
and degenerate activity makes money. Selling drugs is easy, and it makes a lot of money. You know, becoming a doctor is difficult. You have to really take a strong, hard look at this next generation. Like they already feel like they'll never own a house. They don't have all the opportunities from 2 generations ago. And so the shortcuts are very attractive to them. And they don't really have any parenting around. They're letting the tablets raise the kids. And if you do that, because it's easy, if people are going to continue to get swallowed into hedonism, then you get what you deserve. We're going to collapse. We've got a $38 trillion debt. The rug's going to get pulled out from under you anyway. So you either straighten it out now or it becomes irreversible.
Fascinating, Ryan, because everything you said there is a narrative that I've kind of pushed. For instance, in the war on Iran, this hedonism, this culture that you're talking about is exactly what, say, Iran International, for instance, and all the plethora of Israeli, American-backed media is attacking Iran with, i.e. this kind of hedonistic culture is something they use to attract young people and say, actually, look, hey, hang on, we've got this fantastic American dream, and the dream is that you can have all of this kind of hedonism, and what's the alternative?
Representative democracy that supports a monarchy. They always couch it in some do-gooder facade. Oh, this is to help the environment. This is to help the children. This is to help some unarguable good. But it's never what it actually says. All the legislation about climate change and exchanging carbon credits and things is just about monopolizing the distribution and production of these gases that they've labeled, which gives big ag and big pharma further monopolies by buying up the allotments of their competition. But that's what I just said is too complicated for people to get. They're just like, oh my God, all the ice is going to melt. We're going to flood just like the movies. And they're just using like something like a real issue, but they're not giving a real solution. It's just an excuse to keep the third world, first world. And this is what they do, like under the guise of protecting the environment, under the guise of keeping you safe. They have a total surveillance state and can spy on you. And like AI, I tell you exactly what AI is being used for. Porn. That's what the majority of AI is right now, is making porn. This is how it's going to be because we already have a sick society. And so the way technology is actually used is going to be driven by the humanities. And a sick society will use the tools in a sick way. And that's the direction we're headed because honor is dead. Masculinity is dead. Everything's relativism. Everything's like just universalized. There's no moral principles. And it got that way by letting the TV and computer babysit the kids.
Absolutely amazing summary of one aspect. Tony, another aspect is that people are beholden to food chains, food production, and even the theft of the commons, which we've talked about before on a previous show. That is another vital part because the food production is another way of ransoming people. Having the entire chain under your control is a reality now for these same Epstein class, because Bill Gates, the Warren Buffetts of the world, they've been buying up land as if they didn't have enough already, but they're actually definitely buying up huge amounts of land. And the likes of Larry Fink and the BlackRock fraternity, they're buying up houses. So that they're selling us the idea of like, have nothing, own nothing, be happy. That's what Klaus Schwab has been selling everybody. But at the same time, they're grabbing everything, and grabbing everything means that the control of the commons, water, gold, silver, cobalt, lithium, aluminium, whatever it is, they want to own all of that, and they're clearly buying up the land along with the state. These stakeholder capitalists who Klaus Schwab wants to push in our faces, and this techno-feudalism is busy taking charge of everything from food production in a Monsanto GMO way, and also at the same time, they are able to control the supermarkets, which they also own through all these kind of massive companies, which all go in a pyramid structure back up to your asset managers and are controlled by the same billionaires or whatever. It seems like we're in a mortgage, like a death grip of a sort that we need to first of all recognize before we can come up with alternatives and to buy out of it. I mean, the alternative isn't necessarily, in my opinion, going back to medieval society or having just an agricultural society, which is what many people might think, oh, that's what we're advocating. Technology can be used positively, but it can't be in the hands of these kind of psychopaths and these Malthusians, surely.
No, well, no, you're quite right. The idea of controlling water and food, of course, this has become much bigger since we had the Reaganomics and Thatcher in the 1980s, and the supermarket networks have become much more powerful. We used to have state assets that controlled these things, like the marketing boards for meat and milk and this sort of thing, where there was an understanding that these markets were not allowed to run riot, that they would have to serve the public. And in fact, I was just chatting to someone the other day who's a retired chap who worked in customs. He was a public servant. I said, well, I find it difficult to actually find any public servants anymore. There was a different culture when we had a mixed economy, when the government ran something like a third of the economy was in government hands. It was run not for profit. The idea was that this is a public service. It's a natural monopoly. Things like water, gas, electricity, these kinds of things were all in those hands until Margaret Thatcher came along. Were in our hands. And then she sold off the family silver. So it's much easier in that sort of situation to drive people into debt. And once they're driven into debt, then they can go, it's much easier to do what Ryan's talking about there and get them into the hands of the organised crime of various sorts, whether it's pornographic, or drugs, anything. And in fact, that's what the organised crime love, is to have lots of poor people around. They're very easy to recruit. And so, in a way, I like to call it the hijab syndrome. We've got this idea that the hijab is somehow terribly wrong and oppressive. Well, when I was growing up in the early 1960s, many, many women in this country, including the Queen, actually, she was up until the 1990s, would wear a headscarf. And this is about modesty. It's not about oppression. It's just about modesty. And it's almost like wearing a ring or something, saying, look, I'm married. Yeah. So don't try it on.
Moderation seems to have been thrown by the wayside.
This is the moral compass that we've really lost, I think, since maybe the 1960s, the introduction of the pill, for example. There's been a loss of moral compass. And that's exactly what I think part of any kind of rehabilitation. And you know what? Amongst many young people in this country, I see it. I see them understanding, this country seems to have lost its moral compass, but me and my fiance, me and my family, we have a moral compass. So re-embracing that, which I think is almost like there's been a backlash from the getting rid of it completely. I think there was even in the 1980s and 1990s, we had a rip-roaring culture here in London where you had all these people working in the city of London who were just selfish. And they were unashamedly selfish. There's been a backlash, I think, against that. And a lot of young families, young people, once they've met somebody that they want to settle down with, they can see that actually these old-fashioned moral values are key. And I think we're talking here really about this love thy neighbour idea. Let's think about someone else or think of others before yourself. These basic concepts, which in this country, the Christian church have been being thrown out by all of these elite institutions.
Yes.
And by that, I include the Church of England, embracing now a new archbishop who apparently, certainly from the evidence I've seen, is a safeguarding disaster. And she has caused all sorts of trouble in the past with her lack of safeguarding, looking after other priests. So why is she being promoted? So we have a deliberate attempt here, it seems to me, to stuff all of our elite institutions, whether it's church, press, universities, government, etc. And there are quite a lot of them, including intelligence services, of course, with the wrong people, deliberately and on purpose. And so the reaction to that, and I think the positive thing that's coming out of it, and it's inevitable because humanity is a survivor. I mean, humanity will survive all of this, is this re-embracing of some of these, in this country anyway, Christian moral values, Abrahamic moral values, where the idea of other is more important than me. And of course, this is the diametric opposite to the Thiels, to the Musks, who for them, it's all about them. The money and the power that they have makes them gods. Sorry, guys, you're kidding yourself.
Yep. Final word goes to you, Ryan. The solutions, we've touched on many of them as a possibility. In summary, I mean, again, to push back against the scope and the scale and the diversity of the attack that is going on clearly, in my opinion, on human civilization and our values and our futures and our health. What do we need an actual global movement, if you like? Because they're very organized. They communicate with each other. We can see from the Epstein files that they talk to each other. They've got ideologies. They pass these around. Tony talked about the Bilderbergs and other established institutions, the Club of Rome, etc. So they clearly have money and power and direction and institutions that can engineer the future they want. We, in return, have people power, but none of what they have in terms of trying to get to the goals that we want and the vision we want for society. How does that change?
Well, see, you can name the political changes that we need pretty easy, like enforce antitrust laws. You could have thorium, nuclear energy from thorium, which you can't build a bomb out of. That solves a lot of environmental issues. Like, we know the actions we need to take. The problem is, how can we get those policies actually implemented? Politics is downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from media. A lot of the rot that has created this moral decay in society is from the media. We need role models. People communicate through stories. That's what resonates with a lot of people. It's what we used to have. I don't see a Fred Rogers on TV anymore. They don't see examples, because people do lead by example. And you can take that from Christian ethics or not. I mean, we have Bushido in Japan. It's not, never has been a Christian country. It's perfectly functional. In fact, it has less homicides, stabbing, etc., than anything in the Western world. So it's not like a one recipe type of thing. It's not about which vehicle you use for positive change. It's what you don't use. And you cannot allow this rot and filth to be pushed through every medium. And that's what they see, is pure hedonism and rot. And they're not given good role models and examples to follow anymore. It's just a bunch of sophomoric humor type, SpongeBob, Homer Simpson, whatever, at the younger age. And then it's just more degeneracy and stupid man syndrome and stuff in the sitcoms and movies and things. The media is absolutely like where you have to start if you want to change the culture, if you want to change religion, because religion is as religion does. If you want these positive changes in politics, ultimately, then it all starts with media.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. The takeaway I have is that the Epstein class represents a philosophy, an ideology, and it's not one that is healthy for civilization, as far as I can hear from my guests and my own research. And the fact is, there are alternatives. Many of them have been laid out by my guests as well, very, very eloquently, and they're the tip of the iceberg on what solutions are. But again, if we empower those who are hell-bent on making us goyim, or hell-bent on making us a subclass, or using us as fodder in wars, or using our children for sexual gratification, or are just simply hell-bent on creating hedonism, hypersexuality, and a destructive culture, then that's something that we have to oppose, firstly, by withdrawing consent, it seems to me. Withdrawal of consent from all of that is absolutely the first point. So forget about all the others. If you start to withdraw consent from all that they sell you, you've already started fighting the system. So don't say you want a movement or a leader or a Malcolm X or a kind of a Nelson Mandela to come and take you to the promised land here. It's us. We have to, it seems, first of all, get rid of our addictions, stop falling for the traps, stop buying into the filth and the immorality and the moral relativism, and start recognizing what is illusion and what is reality. And for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandchildren, if we don't do it now, these people are on the cusp of having such power through the technological, through the sort of the money power that they have, and through the science or scientism that they're manipulating, that they will actually make it awfully difficult for our grandchildren or our children to be able to recover because they're hell-bent on control, on power, and for using and abusing. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that we can continue our work and bring the voices that actually tell you the truth. And it is a fact that Ryan and the likes of Tony will be doxed, and you can see why. You can tell why they're going to be censored. You can tell why they don't want them to speak out, because it's diametrically opposed to the destination that these rather evil, I would use the word evil for the likes of Thiel and the likes of Musk. I consider them to be evil. That's the way it is. And buying into anything they say, do, or want you to head towards is your stupidity, ultimately. Thank you. Goodbye.